Rain drifts down the glass like time itself, slow, endless, and indifferent. An older woman sits by the window, wrapped in a soft grey sweater that still carries the scent of cedar and winter. In her trembling hands, a faded photograph, corners bent, colours washed to sepia. It's the image of two people laughing, their faces bright with a kind of joy that only the young know how to believe in. She looks at it for a long time, her eyes neither sad nor happy, just quietly full. Her voice breaks the silence. Once, I believed love would last forever. But time teaches you other truths. The room feels alive with memory. A clock ticks somewhere, but she no longer listens to it. Outside, the rain softens the world, like a curtain between then and now. In her voice, there's no regret, only a weary wisdom that comes from surviving every kind of love, the ones that held her close and the ones that slipped away. And that's where the question begins, the one that lingers long after the credits of life start to roll. How do we love when aging weakens us? How do we let go when the heart still remembers? For Diane Keaton, those questions aren't just cinematic. They're personal. In 2005, as she sat down to talk about The Family Stone, she wasn't only speaking about a character. She was, in many ways, revealing herself. The film told the story of a woman facing illness, family, and the inevitability of change. But behind the camera, Keaton was quietly wrestling with the same themes: time, aging, the long echo of love, and the gentle art of letting go. Her eyes, that familiar mixture of strength and vulnerability, carried a message far beyond the screen. That love doesn't fade, it transforms. That beauty isn't lost, it simply changes shape. And that sometimes, courage isn't about holding on, it's about knowing when to release. This is not just the story of a movie. This is a story of love, of aging, and of the courage to release. By 2005, Diane Keaton was no longer the quirky ingenue who charmed the world in Annie Hall. She had lived through decades of cinematic triumphs, heartbreaks, reinventions, and quiet personal battles. In her mid-50s, she stood as one of Hollywood's few women who had defied time's expectations. A performer who could blend humor and heartbreak so naturally that audiences weren't sure when to laugh or when to cry. There was a particular honesty in her performances. The trembling smile, the nervous laugh, the eyes that always seemed to hold an untold story. Behind that signature turtleneck and those oversized glasses was a woman who understood what it meant to love deeply, to lose silently, and to keep going anyway. That depth is what made her role in The Family Stone so hauntingly real. The film, released in 2005, was a holiday story unlike the glossy ones audiences were used to. It centered on the Stone family, messy, loving, imperfect, and real. Diane played Sybil Stone, the family's matriarch, sharp-tongued, warm-hearted, fiercely protective, and quietly battling breast cancer. The story unfolds over Christmas, when all her children return home, bringing with them their lovers, secrets, and unresolved wounds. The laughter collides with tears, misunderstandings with forgiveness. At its core, the film isn't about Christmas at all, it's about the fragile beauty of family, how love can both wound and heal, and how time changes the way we hold one another. Sybil Stone is more than a character. She's a mirror, for anyone who's ever loved fiercely while knowing that goodbye might be near. She knows she's running out of time, but she hides it behind wit and strength. She mothers her children not by protecting them from pain, but by teaching them how to face it. Her illness is never the center of the story. Her spirit is. Through Sybil, Diane Keaton gives aging a face that isn't tragic but defiant, a woman still in charge of her heart, her family, and her dignity. What makes The Family Stone so powerful is how it captures the contradictions of love, the laughter that happens moments before tears, the harsh words spoken out of fear, the clumsy attempts at connection. It's a film that understands that family love isn't perfect, it's chaotic, human, and sometimes heartbreaking. And within that chaos, Diane Keaton glows at the center like a quiet flame. When she sat down for that 2005 interview, the one we now know as Diane Keaton on The Family Stone, aging, love, and letting go, she wasn't simply promoting a movie. She was speaking as a woman who had lived long enough to understand what Sybil Stone represented. In her voice, there's a mixture of reflection and release. She talks about what it means to age gracefully, to learn to live without the intoxicating rush of romantic obsession, to find new kinds of love, for family, for memory, for the simple act of being alive. Listening to her, you feel that she's not acting anymore. She's remembering her early years in Hollywood, the romances that shaped her, the friendships that faded, the faces she's loved and lost. The Family Stone became more than a film, it became a confession wrapped in fiction. Through Sybil, Diane Keaton spoke to every woman and every man who has stood at the threshold between holding on and letting go, between the person they were and the person they're becoming. And that's where this story truly begins, not in the sparkle of Hollywood, but in the quiet courage of a woman who dared to grow older, to stay vulnerable, and to keep loving even as the years slipped away. The camera opens on Diane Keaton in 2005, seated comfortably in a quiet studio. There's something luminous about her, not just the light catching her hair, but the way she carries time on her face without apology. She laughs, gestures, searches for words the way she always does. Thoughtful, slightly hesitant, always truthful. What begins as a simple conversation about the Family Stone soon turns into something more intimate, a meditation on what it means to grow older, to love differently, and to let go of what no longer serves you. She starts with aging. Her voice is steady, almost playful, but her eyes betray a certain tenderness. You know, she says softly, the thing about getting older is, it's not what you think it's going to be. You spend so much time worrying about how it'll look, the wrinkles, the hair, but what really changes is the rhythm of your heart. She talks about aging not as a tragedy, but as a teacher. She acknowledges that with time comes a new kind of vulnerability, the awareness that there are fewer years ahead than behind, yet also a strange, luminous freedom. It's like you stop chasing, she explains. You stop needing to be someone's idea of perfect. You start noticing what's actually beautiful. There's a pause. She smiles, the kind of smile that carries both memory and mischief. Then she shifts, gently, honestly, into the topic that surprises many, love. Romantic obsession. She admits, half laughing, half sighing, that much of her life was spent in love with the idea of love. I was addicted to that feeling, she says, the intensity, the electricity of it. But at some point, you have to learn to live without it. There's no bitterness in her tone. It's more like acceptance, even gratitude. She's talking about the kind of romantic obsession that once defined her, the kind that inspired great art and terrible heartbreak, but now, she says, she's learning to love differently. It's not that love goes away, she reflects. It just changes its shape. It becomes quieter, wiser, less about being seen, more about seeing. Here she moves from speaking about the film into deeply personal territory. In The Family Stone, her character Sybil faces the inevitability of loss, of health, of control, of time with her family. And Keaton, in this interview, seems to echo that truth. She doesn't hide from it. She meets it head-on. You can't hold on to everything, she says softly. That's the hardest part. You have to let life move through you. Let go of what's already gone, or it'll break your heart in half. Her words hang in the air, heavy and tender at once. She describes how Sybil, the mother in the film, is a woman who understands that love isn't about keeping everyone close, it's about teaching them how to be strong when you're gone. And you can feel that Diane herself knows exactly what that means. There's a quiet strength in her voice, the kind that only comes from losing things and surviving it. What she's really talking about, beneath all the movie promotion, is acceptance, of time, of imperfection, of endings. I used to think, she says, that love was something you fought for. Now I think it's something you release into the world. You don't lose it. It just takes another form. As she speaks, the room seems to slow down. You sense that she isn't performing, she's remembering. The men she loved, Woody Allen, Warren Beatty, Al Pacino, all those intense, complicated relationships that once defined her are now just chapters in a book she no longer needs to rewrite. Her smile carries no regret. They were all extraordinary, she says in another moment of the interview. I wouldn't change a thing. But life is about moving forward. You can't stay in love with the past. By the end of the conversation, Diane Keaton isn't talking about fame, or beauty, or success. She's talking about grace, the kind that comes when you stop fighting time and start trusting it. She leans back, thoughtful. We spend our lives trying to hold on, she says, almost whispering. But maybe the bravest thing you can do is let go. And there, in that single sentence, she gives away the quiet philosophy that has carried her through every chapter of her life and every role she's ever played. Aging, love, letting go, they're not separate lessons. They're one. Each teaches the other. And in the gentle light of that 2005 interview, Diane Keaton becomes not just an actress, but a guide, showing us that the end of one kind of love is not the end at all, but the beginning of something infinitely softer and infinitely true. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the scent of it still lingered, that sweet, metallic smell of wet earth and memory. Eleanor sat by the window, her fingers tracing the outline of a photograph so worn the edges had begun to curl. It was of her and Michael, taken in their 30s, both laughing, their faces pressed together in sunlight. They looked immortal then, invincible in love, untouchable by time. Now, decades later, she studied the picture as if trying to remember what that kind of joy had felt like. Somewhere between then and now, it had all gone quiet. Eleanor had met Michael when she was 34, a moment that felt less like fate and more like recognition. He was gentle and brilliant, with eyes that carried both sadness and humor. They met at an art exhibition. She was there to escape a life that felt too measured, and he, as he told her later, had come looking for someone who still believed in wonder. They fell in love recklessly, the kind of love that felt like it could rewrite the rules of the world. Nights blurred into dawns, laughter spilled into arguments, and promises were made as if time were infinite. For years, they built a life filled with both beauty and chaos. 2 children. A small house by the sea. The clutter of art books, half-finished letters, and coffee cups that never seemed to be in the right place. They fought, over the small things that meant everything. Over how much to give, how much to hold back, how much to dream. Yet beneath every argument was an unspoken truth: they needed each other. But life, as it always does, began to carve its slow distances. The children grew, careers shifted, illnesses came and went. Michael, once endlessly curious, began to retreat into silence. There were days Eleanor would find him sitting at the kitchen table long after his tea had gone cold, staring at nothing. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd smile faintly and say, "Just remembering." Those words terrified her, because she knew that remembering was a kind of leaving. Years passed like pages turning in a book she hadn't finished writing. They loved, but not like before. Love had grown quieter, shaped by compromise and survival. There were still touches, still laughter sometimes, but also long pauses, moments where she felt she was speaking across an invisible ocean. She told herself this was what maturity was, love transformed into companionship. But at night, when the house was still, she'd catch herself whispering his name, as if calling back a version of him that had already slipped away. Then came the autumn when everything changed. Michael's health began to falter, small things at first, a tremor in his hands, a forgetfulness that grew into confusion. Doctors spoke in measured tones, using words like degeneration and inevitable progression. Eleanor sat in their office, nodding, clutching her bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. When she came home, she didn't cry. She made soup. She folded his clothes. She pretended the world was still the same. But inside her, something began to unravel. She started writing letters she never sent, to him, to herself, to the version of their love that no longer existed. In one of them she wrote, "You were the storm and the shelter. You made me brave and afraid all at once. But I don't know how to hold you anymore without breaking." The turning point came one quiet morning in winter. She found him asleep in his chair, the early light spilling across his face. For a moment, he looked like the man from the photograph, the one who had once danced with her in the kitchen, who whispered poems into her hair. But when he opened his eyes, he didn't know her name. She smiled anyway, sat beside him, and whispered, "It's all right, love. You can let go now." From that day, she began her own process of letting go. Not in one sudden act, but in 1,000 small gestures. Packing away his old letters, giving his books to the library, walking alone along the path they once took together. Each step felt like a betrayal, yet also a kind of mercy. She began to understand what Diane Keaton had once said in an interview, that love, in its truest form, is not about possession, but about release. The final moment came one late afternoon, when the sky burned gold and the wind carried the scent of autumn. She returned to the window where it had all begun, holding that same faded photograph. The laughter in the picture now felt like an echo from another life. She pressed her lips to the image, then opened the window. The air was cold, but it felt clean. Slowly, she released the photograph, letting it drift into the wind, spinning and tumbling until it disappeared beyond the trees. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered. Not in sorrow, but in gratitude. The ache in her chest softened, replaced by something still and luminous. She understood now that love doesn't end, it simply changes its shape. It becomes the quiet in the room, the whisper in the wind, the memory that lingers long after the body forgets. As the sun sank below the horizon, Eleanor closed the window and sat in silence. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt a lightness she hadn't known in years. The kind that comes when you finally stop clinging to what was, and begin to make peace with what is. When Diane Keaton speaks about the family stone, there's a quiet wisdom in her tone, the kind that comes only after years of holding on and finally learning how to let go. She doesn't dramatize aging. She accepts it as a natural shift in the rhythm of life. In that 2005 interview, she talks not only about her role as Sybil Stone but about herself, a woman who had spent much of her life in love with the idea of love. She admits, gently, that she's learning to live without romantic obsession. It isn't sadness in her voice when she says it, but release, as if she's finally made peace with the changing shape of her heart. That sense of peace is exactly what echoes in Eleanor's story. Like Keaton, Eleanor begins her journey believing that love must be passionate to be real, that intensity equals devotion. But as time passes, she learns what Keaton describes so eloquently. Love is not only about the flames, it's about the warmth that remains after the fire. In both women, there's a shared reckoning, the recognition that life gives us love not to own it forever, but to teach us something about our own capacity to feel. When Keaton reflects on aging, she often describes it not as decline but as transformation. In the interview, she laughs softly about how time changes what we chase, how you begin to see love not as something to conquer but as something to honor. For Eleanor, aging is a mirror. She sees herself growing softer, more reflective. The woman who once fought to keep Michael close becomes the woman who learns that love's truest act is the courage to let it drift away. When Keaton says, "We learn to live without the romantic obsession," Eleanor lives that truth. Her story is the embodiment of it. In The Family Stone, Sybil Stone's illness casts a shadow over the family, but she never lets it define her. She's aware that her time is running short, but she uses those final days to teach her children what it means to hold one another, fiercely, honestly, and without fear. There's a scene where she says, "We're all we've got." That line becomes the emotional anchor of both the film and Diane Keaton's philosophy. It's not about clinging to what's slipping away, it's about recognizing the gift of presence, the people we love, the memories we've built, the moments we still have left. Eleanor's farewell mirrors Sybil's quiet courage. Both women face loss not as tragedy but as transition. Sybil releases her family into the future, trusting they'll find their way without her. Eleanor releases her love, trusting that it will live on in memory, even after the photograph fades. Both understand that letting go is not the opposite of love, it's its final expression. Keaton's reflections in that interview also reveal something deeper, a kind of gratitude for impermanence. She acknowledges the vulnerability of aging, yes, but also the freedom it brings. You stop needing to be chosen, she implies, and start choosing yourself. That sentiment hums quietly beneath Eleanor's story. After Michael's passing, she isn't left with emptiness, she's left with understanding. She learns that to age is not to lose love, but to love differently, more quietly, more truthfully, without demand. Both Diane and Eleanor carry the same emotional truth, that life is an ever-changing act of surrender. The younger versions of themselves wanted forever. The older versions understand that love's beauty lies in its impermanence. The laughter that once filled the room becomes silence, but that silence is sacred, filled with everything that was shared and everything that still remains in spirit. In the end, Keaton's words and Eleanor's story converge on the same point of light. Love changes. Bodies change. Time takes what it must. But what endures is grace, the grace to remember, to forgive, to move forward without bitterness. Diane Keaton, through her performance as Sybil Stone and her reflections on her own life, teaches that aging isn't about losing love, it's about carrying it in new forms. Eleanor, through her fictional yet deeply human journey, shows us what that looks like in motion, a woman learning to turn her pain into peace. And as the two stories fold into one another, the real and the imagined, we hear Keaton's voice echo softly, like a benediction, "We're all we've got." It's not a statement of loss, but of love, the kind that lingers even after the photograph slips from your hand and disappears into the wind. Love, when we first encounter it, feels eternal. It rushes in like spring, wild, uncontained, fragrant with promise. It teaches us to dream, to chase, to believe that connection can defy everything, even time. But what Diane Keaton, through her words and work, teaches us is that real love is not about possession, it's about presence. It's not about how tightly we hold on, but how gracefully we learn to let go. Letting go, in its truest form, is the greatest act of love because it requires both courage and compassion. It means choosing the happiness or peace of another, or your own, over the illusion of control. Keaton has hinted at this philosophy throughout her life, especially when she said she's learning to live without romantic obsession. Those words carry the weight of someone who has loved deeply, lost silently, and come to understand that love does not end with a relationship, it transforms. To release someone, or even a version of yourself, is to acknowledge that love's purpose has been fulfilled. Psychologically, letting go represents the reconciliation between attachment and acceptance. It's what Carl Jung described as individuation, the process of integrating every experience, even heartbreak, into a fuller sense of self. Eleanor, in her story, embodies this transformation. At first, her identity is intertwined with Michael's. Her love defines her. But as he fades from her life, she begins to see that love was never meant to be a cage. It was a mirror, showing her who she could become once she stopped clinging to what was gone. Love evolves. What begins as passion often matures into tenderness, then memory, and finally, if we're lucky, self-love. Diane Keaton's own life mirrors that evolution. Known for her romantic entanglements with figures like Woody Allen, Al Pacino, and Warren Beatty, she has openly admitted that she never married, not because she didn't believe in love, but because she understood its impermanence. In later interviews, she said that love changes shape, that what once felt like fire becomes warmth, a quieter but no less powerful force. That's the shift from obsession to compassion, from needing to be loved to learning to love yourself. The tension between holding on and releasing is one of life's most universal struggles. It's the push and pull of the tide, the human instinct to cling to what brings comfort, even when it's time to move on. But as Keaton and her characters remind us, release is not a betrayal, it's an acknowledgement that love's work is done. The Japanese call this concept mono no aware, the beauty of transience, the sadness and sweetness of impermanence. It's the realization that every beautiful thing is meant to end, and that its ending makes it beautiful. Aging, too, is an act of letting go, of the body's old strength, of youthful illusions, of the endless what-ifs. Yet within that loss lies the gift of perspective. As the years accumulate, so does understanding. Keaton often speaks about the freedom that comes with aging, the ability to stop chasing approval and start embracing authenticity. "I'm more myself now than I ever was," she once said. That statement holds the quiet triumph of someone who has weathered time's storms and learned to stand in her own light. The seasons of life mirror this truth perfectly. Spring is passion, bright, impulsive, full of bloom. Summer is devotion, steady, enduring, radiant. Autumn is reflection, a time to gather, to cherish, to prepare. And winter, often feared, is not death but rest. It's the season of clarity, where love takes on its purest form, memory. Eleanor's story unfolds in that winter season. Her release of the photograph isn't just a goodbye to Michael, it's a welcoming of peace, a recognition that what they shared doesn't need to be held to be real. In the end, love, loss, and acceptance are not separate experiences. They are chapters of the same book. To love is to risk loss, to lose is to learn acceptance, and through acceptance, we rediscover love in a new form. Diane Keaton's reflections and performances reveal this cycle again and again, from the naive charm of Annie Hall to the aching grace of the family Stone. Her life's art is a meditation on impermanence, a reminder that every ending carries within it the seed of renewal. The tides pull away, the leaves fall, the photograph drifts from our hands, and yet, love remains. It lingers in the echoes of laughter, the texture of memory, the quiet self who has learned to endure. As Keaton herself embodies, love's final act is not clinging to the past but embracing the beauty of what remains. The stillness after the storm, the light after the loss, the courage to stand alone and still feel whole. So what does all of this mean for us, the ones watching, listening, living our own versions of these stories? Diane Keaton's reflections, and the story of Eleanor and Michael, aren't just cinematic poetry. They're lessons whispered from lives that have known both beauty and ache. They remind us that love, aging, and loss aren't tragedies to fear, they are inevitabilities to embrace with grace. To face aging realistically is to stop fighting the mirror and start honoring the life it reflects. Every line, every crease, is a story, evidence of laughter, sorrow, survival. As Keaton has often said, she doesn't see aging as a defeat but as a kind of freedom. When you accept that time will change your face, your body, your rhythm, you begin to live more deeply. You stop rushing. You stop performing. You start existing. The lesson is not to mourn the passing of youth but to celebrate the arrival of truth. And what about love? How do we keep loving when time makes everything fragile? We do it by shifting how we love. The young love to possess, the wise love to witness. To love someone without trying to hold them in place is one of the hardest and most beautiful acts of maturity. Letting go without bitterness means understanding that every relationship, whether it lasts a moment or a lifetime, leaves behind something sacred. Even endings carry meaning. As Keaton said in her 2005 reflections, letting go is not surrender, it's grace. It's the understanding that the people who walk out of our lives still walk with us, in memory, in habit, in the quiet corners of our hearts. We all carry things, the photograph, the letter, the memory we revisit on sleepless nights. But ask yourself, what do you carry because it brings you peace, and what do you carry because you're afraid to forget? Sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing yourself to set something down, not because it meant nothing, but because it meant enough. Aging, love, loss, they all teach us to see differently. They ask us to find beauty not in what we keep, but in what we've had the courage to release. Like Eleanor at her window, or Diane Keaton reflecting on her years of passion and solitude, we are all faced with the same quiet reckoning. How do we live without clinging? How do we honor what's gone without being trapped by it? So pause for a moment. Think of the loves you've known, the ones who changed you, the ones who left, the ones you still carry like ghosts. Ask yourself, what if the story isn't about losing them at all, but about finding yourself again through their memory? Because in the end, that's what Keaton's voice, her art, and her honesty invite us to do. To find grace in impermanence, to forgive the passage of time, to keep our hearts open even as the years grow heavy. Let love change shape. Let time do its work. And when it's time to release, the photograph, the person, the past, do it gently, knowing that what's real never truly leaves. We live, we love, we let go, and somehow, in that letting go, we become whole again. The light through the window had changed. It wasn't the grey wash of rain anymore. It was golden, warm, the kind of light that makes even the dust in the air look like glitter. Eleanor sat where she had always sat, by the same window, but the photograph was no longer in her hands. The space where it used to be, empty, open, felt like a quiet victory. She breathed deeply, slowly, as if her lungs were learning a new rhythm. Outside, the world moved softly. The wind rustled through the trees, and the last leaves of autumn shimmered before letting go. She watched one drift lazily past her window and smiled, a small, knowing smile. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the ache of absence, she felt gratitude. Gratitude for having loved, for having lived, for having been brave enough to release. Her voice returned, gentle now, no longer heavy with longing. Letting go does not erase love, she whispered. It transforms it. The words hung in the air, neither sad nor triumphant, just true. Because love never disappears, it changes shape. It becomes the memory that steadies you, the kindness you show to others, the quiet strength that carries you forward. Love, when released, becomes light. As her reflection blurred in the glass, Eleanor thought of Michael, not with tears, but with tenderness. Somewhere, she believed, he was at peace too. The love they shared no longer bound her. It surrounded her, softer now, freer. It lived not in the photograph that had flown away, but in the very act of her letting it go. In the distance, the sun began to dip below the horizon, spilling gold and crimson across the sky. The world was moving toward evening, not an ending, but a beginning of quiet. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt the stillness of a heart at ease. And then, as if echoing her thought, Diane Keaton's voice seemed to whisper through the moment, a line that could have come from the family stone, or perhaps from her own life, "We're all we've got." The screen fades to the image of a photograph lying face down on a windowsill, the light shifting gently across its back. The camera lingers, just long enough for the audience to understand. Love hasn't vanished. It's just turned over, waiting quietly in the light. Fade out.